Hi, I'm Lillian Halseth Taylor, and I was Wayne Halseth's wife at Breitenbush Hot Springs. I met him and went to work up there in 1955. We got married in 1956. My parents and myself and siblings lived in Detroit as my dad took a job on the dam project, and my mother went to work at the post office department. So she came home one day and said, Breitenbush is looking for people to hire to work, and why don't you go up and check it out? So I did, and I got the job, and later married Wayne, who was the crabbier of the two brothers. I was interviewed by Wendell and Wayne, and Wendell was very cheerful, very happy, and Wayne got right down to business, asking all the important questions. My earliest memories probably of Breitenbush go back to when I was maybe 12 or 13, when we would go on journeys up to the hot springs, and with kids, you know, it's all about swimming and picnics and go to the river and that kind of stuff. So that's how I got started. And you ask how Wayne got involved in Breitenbush and Wendell, and the two of them made this decision obviously before I came around, but from what I understand, they went there often as children with their parents, and their father was almost crippled with foot problems. So he went up and stayed, I think, for 2 or 3 months to get his feet corrected. And while he was there, he met an Indian man who was using the hot springs, and he looked at his feet and he said, "You've got broken arches." And so he said, "If you'll do this, you can correct your injury." He did that, and it did correct his injury. He was a barber and by trade, and also a musician, so he did his music on 2 or 3 days a week for dances and so forth. He was a drummer. And Wendell carried that on. They were a very talented family, very happy. They knew how to live and have a good time working. They
So-
bought, go ahead.
So who are your parents?
My parents are Alan and Marie Butler,
Okay.
and you know, it's just nothing planned. That's just the way it was, and that's where he went to work. And they moved away after the dam was finished, and moved actually on to Fairbanks, Alaska.
And when you went to work at Breitenbush the first time and interviewed for a job, what kind of work were you doing then?
It was for mostly restaurant work, because we had a snack bar that was connected to the store, and then we had a dining room that was in the hotel. So when you got a job, you really ended up doing everything. You did the cooking, you did the dishes, you did the serving. That was at the lower resort. There wasn't an upper until they purchased the other resort.
Right. Yeah. So, who did Wayne buy the resort from? That was Kennedy?
He bought it from a fellow by the name of E.C. Kennedy, and as I recall, he ran it for about 12 years. He was a very fussy person, I understand, and he kept things in quite good condition. I think they may have stayed there the year round. I don't have any personal knowledge of that actually, but I think so.
And did you ever know the Skiffs? Did any of the Skiff family come around?
Never heard or saw anything of the Skiff, so I know nothing about them at all.
So tell me what comprised the lower resort. Cabins?
Okay, we had 31 cabins. It was built in a U-shape to the main road. We had 10 hotel rooms. There was a lodge. There were the 10 rooms. There was a dining room and a big lodge room, and it was all very pretty. There was a campground, store, gas pump, and the hot mineral baths, and of course the bridge that went across the river that everybody used for fishing. And it was 22 acres on a special use permit from the Forest Service.
And it was all on one side of the river except the bridge over to the bathhouse.
Yes.
That's where the hot springs are.
The hot springs are across the river, and the bathhouse steam rooms were actually built over the top of the hot springs, and it was really boiling hot water. And the pools were a men's side and a women's side, and it was not diluted water. We had to run it a stream in about the size of your finger. If it was any more than that, it was too hot to get in the next day. So it would be full by morning. And then we had a wonderful masseuse that gave massages at the bathhouse. So she was great.
Now, there was a flume that directed water to a powerhouse.
Yes.
Power plant?
Yes.
Turbine?
Yes. I want to think that's called a Pelton wheel, but you know, I could be wrong. All I know is I had to rake leaves at the grate, and we had to do that at least twice a day. Wayne was an electrician, and so he knew that power plant forward and backwards. Wendell had worked for the telephone company, so between the two of them, they had a lot of knowledge on how to keep things running, and they certainly had the energy to do it and the dispositions, but not any former resort experience. We kind of all learned by initiation by fire, you know how that goes. But that was pretty much how that all started. The powerhouse was direct current, and so we had to be very careful not to have any AC motors plugged in. And we warned people of that when they came to the store and said, don't plug in your hair dryer, don't plug in this and that. But pretty soon the power would go way down, and you knew just a minute, it'll be burned out, and then it will come back up again. So if they're in the spring and the fall, when you've got a lot of things falling on the ground, the grate to the powerhouse would get pretty plugged up. So, you know, we'd have to go down there 2 or 3 times a day, and maybe in the fall, many times a day. But Wayne would check it always, put belt dressing on it, and it just kept clicking away. It was an amazing little plant. We put a log across the river every spring, and it formed a dam to raise the level of the water enough to go to the flume, and it ran through the powerhouse building and turned a wheel that generated the power, and so that's kind of how that went. It was all sanctioned by the federal water resource people, so that we weren't taking anything away from the river, and it went right back in. So it was very efficient. It worked great.
And what buildings were connected to the power plant and had electricity?
All of them.
All of them?
Everything had power. And they all had a wood stove. So we had about 50 cord of wood that Wayne and our handyman would cut every year for the campground and for the cabins. And not all of them had toilets. We had central restrooms, and they were conveniently located. And then, of course, the bathhouse, anybody could go in and pay for a shower and take a shower. So they were kind of camping cabins, but a little nicer than that, and they had a shelter. So our customers pretty much were the same people coming back year after year after year, families and individuals. They had a very good time.
Now, the place was pretty well built out with cabins and the hotel when you got there mid-50s, and you maintained what was there, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. We try to improve on everything all the time. You have new roofs to put on. Things are breaking all the time. And the spring and the fall were the really hard times, because you have to clean, get everything ready and stocked up for the summertime, and then in the fall you have to put it all to bed so that you didn't have broken pipes and everything all the time. So it was a lot to do.
So it was a seasonal place from what, late May to October 1 type of thing?
It was. We would start working up there probably in March, and we had painting and doing all the things I detailed a minute ago, and But our official opening was always Memorial Weekend, and it was always disheartening to have everything ready to go. The rhododendrons are blooming, the weather's been nice, and so you get up on Friday morning before Memorial Day and it has snowed. So then we'd have the rhododendrons in the snow. We've spent every cent that we owned stocking the place up, but the sun had come out and the way it goes, and it was always good. It was good.
So did anybody stay there year-round? Was there a caretaker?
We had a caretaker, and he was there with us almost the entire time, and that was Eric Peterson. He came from Sweden when he was probably 17, 18 years old. He had been a logger, had always worked in the logging industry. He was also a serious alcoholic. So he didn't drive, so by being there, we didn't serve liquor in the store, any kind of beer or wine or anything like that. So he pretty much was on the straight and narrow unless somebody brought him something that he wanted. And that did happen. And actually, that caused his death. There was a young man who befriended him. Eric put all of his money in the bank because he really didn't have any place to spend it. We'd take him to town and he could buy, and we'd bring him groceries all the time and make sure that he was okay. But this young man came up and started visiting him, and he had Eric pull his money out of the bank, and they went on a big drunk and down at Mill City. And on the way home, the guy lost control of his car, and Eric was in the hospital, and he eventually died from those injuries. So then we had someone else do the job until we sold the resort. It was really a pretty responsible job. He was a nice man. Had his own problems.
So let's talk about some of the weather events up there. There was the Columbus Day storm, October 12, '62, and that was not too severe.
I don't
up there.
remember that being an event any more than any other windstorm that we had, and we had them throughout the year. The windstorm that we dreaded was the one from eastern Oregon, because it's an east wind, blows all the debris out of the trees, and sometimes is very forceful. One time in the summer homes area, a tree blew down on a cabin, and the people that owned the cabin had just arrived there, and we had people then come running into the store and says, "You've got to save Mrs. Brickley, she's underneath the tree." And she was under the tree, but the only thing that kept her from being crushed was the refrigerator. So Wayne went in and he pulled wood away and got her out of there, so help me, with a pair of pliers, and got her out. We got medical care for her, and I think she had like 80 broken bones. But she survived and went on to live her life, and she came back every year and told us how grateful she was for saving her life. So those are the storms that are bad. The October 12th storm, I don't think was a bad event, or I'd really remember that. The flood of 1964 was the worst thing that could have happened to us. We had and I don't mean to point fingers because it wasn't intentional, but we had a new ranger in the Forest Service ranger station, and he wasn't really that familiar with our area, I didn't think, but he came to visit and was introduced, and the other people introduced him to us. And he said, "We're going to remove all of the log jams up the river." And they went all the way up to Jefferson Park. There's some deep canyons and pretty pristine water. A lot of native fish were in those pools behind those log jams. And they removed the log jams as promised. And Wayne looked at him and he said, "You will flood us out. That water has to be slowed down before it gets here." And he said, "It'll just be the best thing that ever happened." And I think it was the first year after they did that, the '64 flood come through, and it just scoured out everything. We lost the powerhouse, we lost the flume, we lost the bathhouse, we lost the bridge. A forest clump of trees came right down the river standing upright. Well, when that happens, anything in its way is going. So then it's to rebuild, and rebuilding, where you get the money to do that. So we did get a small business loan, and we had some carpenters and rebuilt it, and we got ready for the next season. So it was something. We used to get, when I first went there, and probably until in the mid-60s, we always had at least 10 feet of snow. And they had a snow plow, but pretty soon you have nowhere to put the snow. You start clear to the edge of the roads, and after a while you have no place to put the snow, so you're stuck. You're in there and you can't get out.
So did you ever meet any of the Bruckmans who owned the upper resort?
Absolutely. Merle Bruckman was the one that owned and operated it. We knew him well. His daughter, Mary Trowbridge, and Wayne went to school together. They went to high school together. So they were great to deal with. When the decision was made to purchase the upper camp, which we renamed it because we had to keep them straight, the lower and the upper camp. They had probably been on bad terms all through the years. They were very competitive resorts. I don't think the former owners liked each other very much, and so this was the first time there was actually a friendship between the two places, and we were packed. It was a family resort. These families have been going up there since the late 1800s, and it was a good place to go. And so we bought the upper camp in about 1958, I think.
56?
Well, I got married in 56, so it wasn't 56. It might have been 57.
Okay.
Maybe 57. So I know it wasn't the first year we got married, but the discussion was going on. And to purchase that, Wayne and Wendell had spent their money buying the lower camp. So maybe they had a little money, but they had the energy, but they got their parents involved. And the Holts, which were Wendell's mother and father-in-law, and Albert and Beryl Halseth, which were Wayne and Wendell's parents, they sold their homes, and so there was a corporation formed. And we worked together as one big resort until about 1960. And it was too big to manage. And if you're going to be a manager, you need to be an on-site manager. Well, we couldn't manage the upper camp from the lower resort because the agreement was Wayne would run the lower resort and Wendell would run the upper resort, and then they would have corporation meetings, and then we would decide. So it was back and forth and back and forth. After we purchased the upper camp, we discontinued the dining room and the snack bar at the lower resort because we were running competition with our own selves. And that could have been a mistake, but probably where the lodge fell down, half of it, in that snowstorm, it was just as well, because then we'd have felt that we had to keep going and doing that. But Wayne and Wendell decided that it was probably better if they didn't try to run each other's operation, so to speak. And so they just traded stock in what one had and the other had. And so we were no longer owners as of about 1960 in the upper camp, but we remained in the lower camp until 1976.
So did you have summer help that came back year after year?
We had, well, of course, Eric Peterson was there for many, many years, almost the whole entire 22 years. But Edna and Dell Dryden came back year after year after year, and then they were killed. And we had another lady who had recently retired but had too much energy to quit working. And then our own two daughters had by then gotten to the age where they became hired help, and so they cleaned cabins and worked like anything. They also learned to drive a car at about 12 years old, because we had a camp car that had mops and brooms sticking out of every window and fresh linen and all that kind of stuff. And so we paid them a regular going rate, but it also had to go in the bank. They could only spend half of it. But it was a great experience for them. And that was a good thing.
Now you said, what skills did Wayne bring to running the resort?
He was amazing in knowing how to fix things. He was almost like a pioneer person. If the water flume got a leak in it, he knew you could stuff it with moss and it wouldn't leak anymore. He knew how to do everything, and he had endless energy to do it. He was on top of it all the time. Wendell also could probably fix anything. If he couldn't fix it, he'd figure out who did know how to fix it, and it got done. So nobody had ever run a resort before, but they had wonderful personalities, and everybody loved them. And they loved doing it. I loved doing it. It was, it's something that we missed. We got tired. That's the only reason we quit.
And what was your role up at the resort?
When I first started there, I was hired to work in the restaurant, and then after we got married, I basically ran the store. I did the reservations, and you're an employee that does everything. Anything that needs to be done. If a cabin suddenly needs to be cleaned and you're there, you do it. If the person at the bathhouse got sick and couldn't show, then you're there. After we bought the upper camp, probably one of my first terror moments was when the chef, and he was a very good chef, and it was seasonal work, so a really good cook is busy the year round. If they're not employed, there's a reason for it. But we found that a lot of cooks drank too much. And so Eric Peterson, being an alcoholic, and evidently our new chef, who was so good, they found a whole bunch of canned fruit and jams and juices in the basement of the big lodge at the upper camp. They had a brew going, and they not only drank it, they ate it, they did whatever it took, and they were so drunk and so sick that the cook couldn't cook. Eric couldn't even get out of bed, and I had to cook. I'm 18, 19 years old, and it's the 4th of July. So here it was, I think the 3rd. They said, Lillian, you've got to go down, you've got to go up and open up the dining room. And I said, I've never even worked there. I had down below. A forgotten thing about that kitchen was there was a range to cook on that was wonderful, but it was wood. It was a wood range. That kitchen was hotter than a firecracker. And you had to keep wood going. What we had under normal circumstances, we had a chef that did the main entrees, we had a salad cook, and we had somebody that made desserts and breads and that kind of thing. Well, on this occasion, I'm up there firing up that stove at 4:30 in the morning. I've got pans of bacon going in. It all went off pretty well, but you know, for a young girl, all I can say is you haven't got brains enough to be afraid. You just do it. And we had a lot of things through the years that you just do it. And Wayne came up to help me for dinner, and somebody ordered pork chops, and he made them, and they sent them back, and he got very upset. I think they ordered 2 poached eggs instead, and he ate the pork chops. So that was kind of a humorous thing that happened. You don't forget those things.
So when people made reservations, did you have a phone system up there?
You know, that was one of the hardest ongoing challenges that we had. we had a telephone line that was strung between the trees from our store, and I guess the upper camp went over the mountain, because I saw the line when I hiked into Leona Lake, which was 3 miles from the resort, going over the top. I think maybe came out at Idana, but it didn't follow the road going down to Detroit, and there was never a telephone line put in. So we were 2 longs and a short, and the upper camp had their own. And it was like the old party line that they would have had on farms and in the country. Then I think fallen trees and so forth took out a lot of that line, so we had a radio phone. And the radio phone, because we had emergencies, there's a lot of emergencies when you've got that many people that far away, whether it was falling down to broken bones to heart attacks, all kinds of things. So we really needed the services, and that was my phone, and I did the reservations. So that was it was an important thing. The mail was delivered and then would go up to the upper camp. I'd try to open the mail and answer it and send it back with him on his way back by. And so it was pretty efficient. We rarely made mistakes, and we were full most of the time.
How was it working with the Forest Service? You had a year-to-year lease with the Forest Service?
We had a year-to-year lease, and you know, everybody's heard the term of a 99-year lease. There is no such a thing, but it can go on for 99 years as long as you perform their requirements, as long as you pay the lease fee, as long as you don't have an illegal activity going on. Very rarely did somebody lose their lease, but I know of one incident, and that was up at the junction of the Sandy Am going up towards Hoodoo, towards Bend. There was a service station, and they had tire chains and all that, and they were on special use. They were shut down. And I think that whole facility was then taken away. But it could have gone on for 99 years. It would still be operating, I'm sure, had we not sold it. But we had a great working relationship with the Forest Service. They learned to trust us and depend on us, because there were times when fires were started and we would put them out. And if it got a little bigger, then they were called. And one time, my girls and Wayne were fighting a fire up the road about 5 miles, and they had taken the axe and the shovel and some water, and then one of the girls drove back down and filled up the tanks again with water, because it was really starting to go. And then the Forest Service came. I don't know, they'd been up there an hour or two working on this, black as they could be when they got back. The Forest Service truck was out of water. So that was a mistake somebody made. I'm sure they got in all kinds of trouble for that. But the Forest Service learned to trust us and depend on us, and to answer your question, I think the lease would still be going. But they did tell us that, you know, we're not in the property management business. We really don't want to be in the property management business. So they really liked things to go along smoothly. Get out of that driver's seat.
And you paid a portion of your profits as
We
part
did.
of the lease?
We did.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was an annual payment. And then we had our payment, I think, to Kennedy until he was paid off. You know, it's hard to get a loan on something, especially where you don't own the land. And then you've got even the upper camp. Bruckman carried the paper on that. And so when Wendell sold that, Bruckman was still carrying the paper. And there were a couple of unfortunate ownerships there.
So did you ever sell mineral water, bottled water?
You know, all we did was work. If there was an easy buck to be made, we didn't know how to do it. We tried. And, you know, you've got to have an organized bottling facility And then you're dealing with the health department. There's enough minerals, enough natural chlorine, enough of everything in the water to be perfectly safe product, but it's got to be handled safely to get there. We didn't have the time or the facility really to do that. We tried it a little bit, but in most cases people just brought their own jugs and they took as much as they wanted and took it home and portioned it out through the year. And that's what basically is how that was all done.
And that was still popular for people to drink the water during your time
It
there?
was huge. And, you know, we were well people, but some people were very, very sick. And it was amazing what it did for them. And I'm not a non-believer, but I'm not a total skeptic. But for instance, we had one lady come with her husband, and she had psoriasis so bad, we couldn't let her in the bathhouse when anybody was there. She looked so bad. Because, I'm sure other people thought, well, we'll get sick too if she's sick. And so we made her take the water to her cabin, and then we let her be the last person in at night and locked the door behind herself. She didn't have one spot of psoriasis on her when she left in the fall. And that was amazing. And we had
that was bathing in the water, right?
And drinking it, and washing the hair, and it has huge medicinal qualities. And I never got into it that much. I just knew that it did, and I knew what I saw when I saw the people that were helped. And it was wonderful.
And that was the same hot spring water that fed the bathhouse that people would drink?
Same thing.
Yeah.
Same thing. We had a faucet on
Right.
the outside so they could fill and take as much as they wanted. It
Right.
seemed to be an unlimited supply.
Now tell me, what other kind of activities did people do besides be at the resort, at the bathhouse, whatever? Fishing, horseback riding, what other kind of things did they do?
Well, that's just exactly what they did. A lot of people went up to rest and use the mineral springs. We had fish delivered by the Game Commission about every 2 weeks until the middle of August. The Game Commission was wonderful to us. The customers very much appreciated it. They got some money for their license, and there was a pack string that we always had at the upper camp, and one of the packers was Gene Ware, and we took several pack trips with him. Wayne and I did, and at the beginning we had, from the resort, it was 12 miles to go to Jefferson Park. Pretty up and pretty down and rough terrain. Then a road was put in up to Fire Camp Lakes, and you could walk in from there, so then it was a 6-mile hike. Otherwise, you could go 12 miles up the road to Breitenbush Lake, and that's the Pacific Crest Trail, and it goes from Canada to Mexico. So there's hiking everywhere, fishing in a lot of lakes. People pretty much had it all, anything they wanted to do. It was good.
Were there particular ethnic groups, Latvians, Russians, Norwegians, that had a particular interest in the resort?
You can imagine there was. In the old country, this is a very revered thing. We had, I have seen many people with the tattoos on their wrists from Germany. I've seen the Latvians who walked out the door with their clothes on their back, and they had mountains that they had to walk over. We heard their stories. Their stories are very sad. And they grew up loving and needing the hot springs, and they like to vacation and travel with their own ethnic group, and we love those people. They'd had a hard life, and there were a lot of them. We had Swedish We had Swiss, we had Italian. There were times when the bathhouse smelled like garlic to the point, when you're sweating like that, the garlic seems to come out. Boy, it was fragrant. And we had some Finnish people, a lot of Finnish people, and some Danish people. And I think it was the Danish people, we raised our rates, I think it was 25 cents. You got to remember now, this is back in the 50s. A camping cabin might be $3 in height. They said, you've just made it unaffordable for us to come. And they came from the Oregon coast, and we wouldn't get off of it, so we never saw them again. That was after years of coming, so that was way too bad. But yes, a lot of ethnic groups, and they all had a story to tell.
Now, when Wayne was interviewed years ago, he said the lower resort had an older clientele and people with young kids went to the upper resort.
That was basically so, but the kids, all the kids wanted the swimming pool. And after the '64 flood, the swimming pool got shut down, which was very unfortunate. But they didn't fill it back with water. It was a new owner at that time. And I think Wayne went up and said, if you don't get some water in that pool, the bottom of it's going to come up. And it did, and it didn't really hold water after that. And so, as far as I know, that pool has not operated since. But it's an Olympic-sized pool. And it had been there for a very long time. So that was too bad.
So tell me about your last years there, what was going on, and deciding to sell.
Both of our girls worked for us. They worked in the store. In fact, our youngest daughter started in the store checking out when she was 7. Wayne had gone to town, gone to some little store someplace, and the owner of that store said that was his son operating the cash register. Well, you got to admit, their minds are pretty uncluttered. And we had bright kids, so he said, Janet, I think you can do this. And she worked at that counter behind the store for years. And her grandma would say, now, are you sure that's right? Or we were always close by. And I said, she rarely makes mistakes. And so she would just pull out the ticket and show them that that's the way it was, and that's how much you owed, you know. So it was good training for them.
So do I understand there was a heavy snow in '66 or '7 and half of the hotel collapsed? Or?
The half of the hotel did collapse. The big lodge room and the dining room and the kitchen collapsed. We did not rebuild those. We kept the bedrooms. We just kept those as hotel rooms, and we did rent those out. But that was very unfortunate that happened, and it was an old building. But our caretaker said, he says, I can't keep up with the snow. I'm shoveling up. And it wasn't long after that it started getting lesser and lesser. Now, last winter, of course, there was no snow, but I think that's not uncommon right now in this day and age.
So, do you have some vivid memories of your time there, special stories to tell?
There were a lot of special stories to tell, and you probably don't have time to listen to all of them. But we had... I started keeping a diary one time, and I thought, you know, I should write a book. But by then, I don't know, 15 years had gone by or something like that, and I thought, this is a bad time to be starting that. I kept a diary for 2 weeks, and there were so many incidents of things that happened, I would just be writing all the time, so I didn't do that. I quit doing that. There were funny stories, there were some kind of tragic stories. I went huckleberry picking with one of our really good customers. We loved them to pieces. They were there from Tillamook, and we went up to Breitenbush Lake and went in huckleberry picking, and he died of a heart attack and fell down next to me, and I did the CPR thing, and then I ran for help, and he was gone, and I knew he was gone. But that was one bad thing. I was patching somebody up almost every day. You either got a fish hook in their finger, or they've cut their head open, and I didn't have any medical training, but boy, I'll tell you, I had butterfly stitches. I had Band-Aids, and it all worked, and some of them never went to a doctor after that. I said, get in the car and now go off to the doctor. You got the bleeding stopped, to go off to the doctor. One lady fell down on the riverbank. She'd been down fishing, I think, drinking, and she said, some of our clientele said, you've got to go down and check on this woman. She's down on the rocks. And so we went down there, and I talked to her, and she said, I can get up in just a minute. Just give me a few minutes. And I said, can you lift your leg? And she did lift her leg, and it bent in her shin. So I said, you're not getting up, and you need to go to the hospital. And there was a caretaker that Mary Trowbridge hired to kind of watch the upper camp between ownerships. And he'd had a brain injury. I think he'd been in the service and so forth, but he was always giving out citizens' arrests. He was going to arrest somebody. He says, I think they're stealing rocks, taking them over the border and stuff like that, But we had one of the things you can't forget are forest fires. And we had a forest fire come within a mile. And I think what you don't realize is when a tree catches on fire and it explodes, it blows that tree a mile. So the Forest Service closed the roads. They let us stay, and we said, we've got to stay here or it'll just burn down. We put out fire after fire after fire, and the smoke was so thick, but we saved it, and they got the fire under control, and so the thing didn't burn down. But there were people brought us, our customers were wonderful. They'd bring us their fresh produce from their garden, because we couldn't have a garden up there. I had a man come in the store one time, and he was a single man, but he wanted to talk. And so he talked about canning, and he had done all this canning. And so I'm praising him for his sticking with it and stuff, and he went out to his car and brought me a whole bunch of jars of stuff I couldn't even recognize, and for me to have, and then he went to the bathhouse, and then our customers came in and said, can you have this man go in a different time? He had a artificial leg, and so he would take that off then to get into the pools, and they didn't want to be there, see all that. So, very happy times, hard work. We were very glad when the season was over. It would sometimes, the last person there in the store at midnight was also the one banging on the door at 5 o'clock in the morning because he forgot to get worms to fish with. And it was very long days. It was a great place to raise the kids. They learned to totally love older people because they would, and I always thought at that time, when I get that old, I hope I have the sense to be that nice to kids, because they would come in the store and say, can your girls come out on the lawn and play cards with us? How nice is that? So I've probably pumped thousands of gallons of gas because it was a hand pump. And it was the only gas around, so you pumped it up to 10 gallons, and then you drained it out, pumped it up to 10 gallons, because it wasn't an electric motor. And
where did you go in the off season?
We, to begin with, Wayne and Wendell and Wendell's family. Wayne was a single man, so they stayed in at the Lower Camp Resort at that time all winter. Wayne walked in and out of there. We calculated several hundred miles that winter because they didn't really have enough provisions to feed him. After we got married, we moved to Salem, and he worked for Cherry City Electric, and they were personal friends as well. So we left one work and went to another work, and I think we counted 15 years that we didn't have a vacation. So we said we're either going to take a vacation or we're going to go nuts. So we forced ourselves to take vacations after that. But we went to Salem, and then went, we'd have to go up every couple of weeks to make sure Eric was okay and everything else was okay.
And tell me about the subsequent owners after you left.
The buyers were the people we sold to, and he was a contractor from Southern California. Very nice people. They had never done anything like this before, and I spent months and months putting together material and training them so that they knew that this is where you go for provisions, this is where you go for laundry, here's our customer base, and here's their addresses, their everything. We gave them absolutely everything. But I think they were overwhelmed by everything. And we thought we could go up and stay there and rent a cabin and enjoy the friends that were there. They were all of our customers from all the years, and that didn't go so well. So we found that they resented our selling it. And so we kind of had to say, I guess we aren't vacationing here. And so we didn't. And they didn't last there very long, only a couple of years. Then they sold to somebody from Alaska, as far as I know, and he also was not an entrepreneur. He sold it to a fellow by the name of George Heigerken. George Heigerken was definitely an entrepreneur, but he was involved in so many things that he didn't really have time to get the resort back on its feet again and get it up and running. And so the Forest Service kept warning him, saying, you need to get this running again. He had grand plans. He had maps. He was going to run the mineral water to every cabin. It would have been wonderful. It had been a forever place. But he didn't do it. He didn't get it done in their time frame. And he did commercial buildings. I'm going to do it. I'll do it next fall. And he didn't get at it. And they pulled the special use permit, and he lost it. And then they didn't, this back to the property management part that the Forest Service didn't want anymore. Some of the buildings were skiddable, and they were taken up to the upper camp, and the rest of them were just destroyed. Whether they just tore them down, or I think they tore them down. I don't think they were burned down, but there's nothing there right now, which is sad.
Right.
I mean, the Indians were there before us, and the earliest pictures I had were in 1894 of this group of men at the bathhouse with this little boy, and the little boy grew up and then was one of our customers, and his name was Kenneth McLennan, and his wife was Minnie. And they walked in as a young couple. Her feet hurt, and she soaked them in this creek. So there's a creek called Minnie Boohoo Creek just down the road. But in this picture taken of these men at the bathhouse, they were the men that most of the trails, the historic places up there are all named for these people. And you've got the Thomases, you had Otterson, it was quite an impressive bunch. So this little boy observed these men in the bathhouse with bullet holes in them. They had knife wounds, they had scars all over them. They were a rough bunch. They were a hardy bunch, and they were probably okay until they drank too much, because that usually was an outlet, I think, that happened a lot. So that's some of my story.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Lillian.
You're very welcome. This is my history that as I remember it. If somebody remembers it differently, that's okay, but I'm the last surviving owner from that era, so I don't know who it would be.
Right.
Okay, thanks. Okay.
So in '68, a group got a hold of the Upper Resort and was advertising to sell shares in the company up there. And can you tell me what you know about that?
I can. It it pretty much came as a surprise that they would be selling stock, and they were aggressively selling stock. So we didn't know the history of the owners too much, and I think the people that we saw were generally salesmen. There was one who did quite a bit of their paperwork, and he was an attorney. As far as I know, he was a disbarred attorney, but it doesn't keep you from having the knowledge that you need if you're going to actually take advantage of people. So the salespeople would come into the lower resort, knock on the doors of our customers, and ask them if they'd come up and walk through the resort and buy stock. They did that at the bathhouse down on the bridge. They'd knock on the cabin doors, and so we got a hold of the prospectus that they were using and to entice people to come and buy stock in the upper resort. The prospectus clearly does not give them any kind of return on their money. So they, our customers, who all had become our friends by that time, they would say, "Wayne, well, what do you think of this?" And he said, "I wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole." And they'd go buy it anyway. And then, they'd come in and say, "We lost our money." He says, "I told you you were going to lose your money." And but they were very aggressive about it. We were surprised that it was honest. I don't know if the intent was to be dishonest from the beginning. When you look at the group of owners, there was no indication there that really that was going to be the intent, but that it was in fact what happened. Everybody lost their money. They took it and they were out and gone out of there. So it was an aggressive move for a short time.
And did they not even pay their summer help? Would you tell me about
They
that?
did not. Well, no, they did not pay them, and most of them were college kids. Considered themselves very fortunate to have a job, and their checks required 2 signatures. So they would come in to our store and say, "Could we cash our payroll check?" And we'd say, "Let's see your check." So you would see, and of course, we didn't know if the check was going to be good, but actually, we didn't take a loss on any of their checks because the second signature usually wasn't on there. So we'd have to give them it back and say, this requires 2 signatures. So go get your second signature and then we'll talk about cashing your check. But usually we never saw them again. So from the time they went to work there until around the 1st of September, before those kids actually knew that they had worked for nothing. And it was sad, that was going to affect their college year, and nobody likes to get taken advantage of. Right. So we were embarrassed by the whole thing. And it seemed like we kind of needed to live down that reputation because it was, when people hear Breitenbush, they take into considerations the whole area, not just the one resort. But anyway, we just dealt with it the best we could, and I felt sorry for the people that lost money. So that's what I know about that.
Now, what kind of special relationship did you have with some wildlife up at your place?
When Wayne and I got married in 1956, we had a baby in the spring of 1957. And so it would have been in about 1958 because Lori would have been like a year and a few months old. it was in the spring, and Wayne went up on the power line, or up, well, it's up on the power line right away, but our water line was from Mansfield Creek, and it was up on the other side of the power line. So he noticed that the ground had been just torn up, just like something awful had happened there, and the ground was all torn up. And so he started investigating that to find a mother deer that was dead. And she had had a bad delivery of her little fawn. And so Wayne said, you know, she's had this fawn, it's apparent, and so that fawn has got to be close by. So he looked and took a radius around where the female was and found the little baby deer. So he brought it home, and we raised the deer on a bottle. It was absolutely the sweetest animal you could ever have. And I started out with, because we had our baby, I had bottles, and you had to be careful on their formula that they got, because if it was too rich, you know, it would not agree with them very well. And as it grew bigger, then it would become like a 7-Up bottle with a nipple on it, like they use for calves. And we let the deer come and go as it wanted. And as it got a little bit older, it would go across the road from the store, go off into the trees and into the woods. And every 4 hours, it was there to be fed again. So it had come loping down the slope, across the road, through the front door of the store, and asked to be fed. So, you know, it was a great attraction for people, and it was a charming pet to have. Our daughter would feed it strawberries, and they were just regular little pals. We had a little dog, and they would sleep together. But it slept by our bed when it was brand new, and I would wake up and look down, and it was looking me straight in the face. So I'd pick it up and rush it outside. As far as I know, it never had an accident in the house, but we were careful, you know, to address that. So then we had our second, well, got in a bit of trouble with the Game Commission on that one, because we found it in May, we had it all summer, and well, then it became like August, and well, what are you going to do now? We came back to Salem, is where we lived, and the little deer, it didn't have a mentor up there, so we called the Game Commission, and they came up and scolded us big time. And everybody at the resort had become friends with this little deer, and it never acted aggressive, didn't do anything. So the poor fish and game guy, he tied its legs, and it rode with my husband in the pickup all the time. It just got in the front seat like a dog and sat there, and they went for a drive, you know, whether they're delivering wood or picking up garbage or whatever they were doing, the little deer was there. So for them to come in and tie him up and do all that kind of stuff. But they say as they get older, they get aggressive sometimes, and they're spoiled, because obviously we spoiled them. And they took him away to a game farm, I mean far away, like Tennessee or some doggone thing. We got the report back. They said, technically we're supposed to fine you, we're supposed to do all these things. We said, we couldn't leave him die. He was dying, you know, it would have died, well, been better off. Well, they wouldn't have had to bother with the results, which was us at that point in time. And then a few years later, we had our second daughter, and she was just a toddler and ran upon a very similar instance. And so we rescued that little fawn, raised it the same way, got the same speech from the Game Commission about, you shouldn't do that. And we said, you know, we're just kind of keepers of the environment, and we'll take care of them. If you have to put them on a farm for renegade deers, then you do that. But you know, all they did was scold us, and that was it. So okay. We loved them. They were dandy. If you get them from the time they're born, they think you're the parents, and and they pretty much do whatever you want. We watched it learn how to use its musk glands for the first time. They pee down their legs and rub their knee knuckles together. And we watched it learn to jump for the first time, and he'd jump straight up and straight down. And then it'd jar his teeth, kind of. And he'd say, oh, that was fun. And then he'd try it again. So he'd hop up and down, you know. They're fun to watch. We had a good time. We had a good time.
And also, can you tell me about hikers or people on horseback coming down from the Pacific Crest Trail?
I can. The Pacific Crest Trail, before the roads were in like they are right now, Fire Camp Lakes and logging has taken roads into within 6 miles of the Jefferson Park itself. So at the beginning, they could leave the Pacific Crest Trail and come down the trail that comes down to Breitenbush. And they would come in for provisions. Sometimes they had their boxes delivered there because they have food and clothes and all that kind of thing. A lot of times they would get off the trail at Breitenbush Lake, hitch a ride with somebody coming or going over a very rough road of boulders that don't move, and it's pretty kind of unimproved, but it's access, I guess. And so they would come, take hot baths, buy groceries, or pick up their mail, or whatever. And then we had a fella come through who was a true cowboy. And he had 2 horses, one probably to pack, and he would ride the other one. And he probably switched back and forth, but he was doing the whole trail, clear from Canada to Mexico. And I don't remember if he started in Canada. I want to think maybe he started his route that direction instead of the other direction. But normally they start in Mexico or close thereabouts and walk through, and they were a gregarious bunch. And no bad stories. No, we'd feed them. I'd usually, if we were close to any kind of a meal time, I would feed them, give them cookies or whatever I had cooked. And the cowboy, he stayed overnight with us and left then. I think it was the next day.